The wind sliced like a blade of ice, finding every gap in Elara's thin, worn coat. It was a cruel wind, a city wind, carrying the scent of exhaust and indifference. She pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around the small, shivering form huddled against her. Her daughter, Lily. Her whole world, condensed into a fragile, 6-year-old body. Snowflakes, once magical, were now tiny daggers of cold that melted on Lily's pale cheeks, mingling with tears she was too exhausted to shed. They were in an alcove, a shallow recess between a closed bakery and a high-end toy store. The irony was a bitter pill in her throat. The window of the toy store was a universe of warmth and light, a diorama of impossible joy. There was a dollhouse bigger than their last apartment's kitchen, a train set that wound through a perfect, cotton snow village, and in the center of it all, a sleigh pulled by gleaming reindeer. Everything they were not, everything they had lost, everything that had been taken. Lily's small voice was a tremor against Elara's chest. "Mommy, is my tummy supposed to rumble so loud?" Elara's heart cracked. Another piece fell away into the cold, empty space inside her. She pressed a kiss to the top of Lily's head, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of her child that even the city grime couldn't erase. "It's just singing a sleepy song, baby. Try to rest." But there was no rest here. Not on the freezing concrete, with the hollow ache of hunger gnawing at them both. Her last few dollars had gone to a cup of lukewarm soup 2 days ago. They had shared it, sip for sip, until the paper cup was empty. Gone. Like their apartment. Like their furniture. Like the illusion of safety she had so desperately tried to maintain. Mark had made sure of that. He had taken the money, the car, her dignity. He had left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a legacy of fear. Lily stirred again, her eyes, wide and impossibly blue, fixed on the toy store window. A tiny finger, peeking from a hole in her mitten, pointed toward the sleigh. "Mommy." "Yes, sweetheart." Elara's voice was a raw whisper. The question that followed was not about food. It was not about the cold. It was a question of pure, childish faith, and it shattered Elara more than any hardship had. "Is Santa coming?" The words hung in the frigid air, a fragile prayer. Hope, a thing Elara had forgotten how to feel. How could she explain that Santa did not visit forgotten alleyways? How could she tell her daughter that the magic had run out? She could not. So she held her tighter and lied through chattering teeth. "Of course, baby. He'll find us. He always does." She closed her eyes, a single, hot tear escaping and freezing on her own cheek. A silent plea to a universe that had long stopped listening. Julian Vance adjusted the collar of his cashmere overcoat. The warmth of his office, 60 floors above the city, still clung to him, but it was fading fast in the face of the December night. He should have left hours ago. Leo would be with the sitter, probably already asleep. Another late night. Another missed bedtime story. The guilt was a familiar companion, a shadow that stretched long behind him no matter how bright the lights of his success shone. Since Isabella's death 2 years ago, the company had become his refuge, a fortress of numbers and deadlines that kept the silence of his penthouse at bay. He walked past the glittering storefronts, his mind on quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. He was a man who solved problems. Complex, multi-million-dollar problems. He built things, empires of glass and steel. But he could not build a time machine. He could not fix the hollow space in his son's life. Or his own. It was a child's voice that broke through his thoughts. Faint. Fragile. "Is Santa coming?" Julian stopped. The question snagged on something deep inside him. A memory of his own son, Leo, asking the same thing last year, his face full of a hopeful skepticism that broke his father's heart. He had assured Leo that Santa was, of course, coming. And he had, in the form of a mountain of gifts that had done little to fill the void left by his mother. Julian looked toward the sound, and he saw them, a woman and a child, huddled in the shadows, almost invisible against the dark brick. They were a portrait of desperation he usually only saw in charity appeals, not 3 feet from his own path. The woman was trying to shield the little girl from the wind, her own body a flimsy barrier. He could see the exhaustion etched onto her face, the stark lines of fear and defeat. He saw the little girl's gaze, fixed on the toy store. His chest tightened. This was not a problem of logistics or finance. This was a problem of basic human decency, of a world that allowed a child to freeze while asking about Santa Claus. Isabella would have been horrified. She would not have hesitated. She would have walked right over, her heart leading the way. His own heart, so long in a state of guarded hibernation, began to ache with a forgotten warmth. He took a step, then another. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten them. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. She pulled the child closer, a fierce, protective motion. He saw the terror in her gaze, and it stopped him. He was a large man, a stranger in an expensive coat. To her, he was a threat. He held up his hands, palms open, a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer than he intended, rough with disuse. I heard your daughter." Elara's entire body went rigid. A man, tall, imposing, silhouetted against the streetlights. Every instinct screamed at her. Run. Hide. Protect Lily. But there was nowhere to go. She braced herself for a demand to move, for a cruel word, for the casual dismissal of the powerful. But his voice was gentle. It was low and calm, with no sharp edges. "It's cold," he said, stating the obvious, yet it sounded like an apology. "Too cold for anyone to be out here, especially a child." He began to shrug off his heavy overcoat. It was a beautiful coat, dark wool, clearly expensive, an item from a world she no longer inhabited. "No," she said, the word catching in her throat. "No, we're fine," a reflexive, pathetic lie. He ignored her protest, continuing his slow, deliberate approach. He did not get too close. He simply draped the massive coat over her and Lily, creating an instant tint of warmth and the scent of sandalwood and clean linen. The sudden heat was shocking. It made her realize just how deeply the cold had sunk into her bones. Under the coat, Lily sighed, a small, contented sound. "Please," he said, his eyes meeting hers. They were kind eyes. Tired, but kind. "Let me help you. There's a diner down the street. It's warm. Let me buy you a hot meal." Elara stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate, overwhelming need. Help was a foreign concept. Help always came with a price, a debt she could never repay. Mark had taught her that lesson well. "We don't have any money," she whispered, the admission a fresh wave of shame. "I do," he said simply, without a hint of condescension. "That's not a problem. Please." For her, he nodded toward Lily, who was now peeking out from under the coat, her eyes wide with curiosity. For her, those were the magic words. For Lily, she would swallow her pride. For Lily, she would risk anything, even kindness. She gave a small, jerky nod. The relief that washed over the man's face was genuine. He offered a hand to help her up, but she flinched, and he immediately retracted it, his expression clouded with understanding. "I'm Julian," he said, keeping a respectful distance as she struggled to her feet, her limbs stiff and aching. "Elara," she gathered Lily into her arms, the child's weight both a burden and an anchor. Julian's coat enveloped them both. He led them away from the shadows, toward the light. The diner was a haven of warmth and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. The sudden blast of heat made Elara dizzy. Julian guided them to a booth in the back, sliding in opposite them. A waitress came over, her eyes flicking from Julian's tailored suit to Elara's disheveled appearance and the massive coat pulled around her. Julian ordered for them without making her ask. Hot chocolate for Lily, coffee for Elara, and 2 plates of pancakes with everything on the side. When the hot chocolate arrived, Lily wrapped her small hands around the mug, her eyes closing in bliss as she took the first sip. Watching her, a knot in Elara's own chest began to loosen. They ate in silence at first. Elara forced herself to eat slowly, to fight the ravenous hunger that wanted her to devour everything in seconds. Lily, however, ate with the unself-conscious joy of a child, syrup smearing across her cheeks. Julian just watched, a small, sad smile on his face. He barely touched his own food. "You have a kind daughter," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "She's everything," Elara replied, her voice thick. After they finished, Julian paid the bill, leaving a tip that made the waitress's eyes widen. Elara expected him to say goodbye then, to send them on their way with a full stomach and a borrowed coat. His act of charity was complete. But he did not. Outside, the snow was falling harder. The wind was even more vicious. "Where will you go now?" he asked, his gaze gentle but direct. The question hung between them, heavy and unanswerable. A shelter? They were all full. A friend? She had none left. Mark had isolated her from everyone. Back to the alley? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Her silence was answer enough. He hesitated, a flicker of conflict in his eyes. He was wrestling with a decision. A massive one. "I have a home. It's large. Too large. There are empty rooms. A warm bed." Elara's breath hitched. "We can't." "Why not?" he asked. "My son is there, with his nanny. It's safe. It's warm. It would just be for the night. Until you can figure things out. A stranger's home." The warning screamed in her head. But then she looked at his face, at the earnest concern there. She looked at Lily, who was already starting to shiver again despite the coat. And she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. A desperate, fragile intuition. It told her to trust him. "Okay," she whispered. "For the night." The car was a sleek black sedan, the kind she'd only ever seen in movies. The interior was soft leather and smelled faintly of that same sandalwood scent. The heat was a gentle caress. Lily fell asleep almost instantly, her head lolling onto Elara's lap. The drive was silent. The city lights blurred into streaks of color through the window. They drove to a part of the city she had only ever seen from a distance, a skyline of glittering towers that pierced the clouds. The building had a doorman who greeted Julian by name, his eyes betraying only a flicker of surprise at the sight of Elara and Lily. They rode a private elevator that ascended with a silent, stomach-dropping speed. The doors opened directly into his apartment. Or rather, his penthouse. Elara stepped out, and her breath was stolen away. The space was immense. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, revealing a panoramic, godlike view of the snow-dusted city below. The furniture was minimalist and elegant, the art on the walls subtle and expensive. It was beautiful, stunningly so. But it was also silent. It was the kind of silence that had weight, that pressed in on you. It was the silence of a space that was not a home, but a showroom. It felt empty, lonely. A woman in a kind, professional uniform appeared. The nanny. She smiled warmly at Julian. "Leo is asleep, Mr. Vance. He had a good evening." "Thank you, Maria. You can go home now. My driver will take you." He spoke with a quiet authority that was both commanding and respectful. After Maria left, the silence returned, deeper than before. "Let me show you to your room," Julian said, his voice seeming too loud in the cavernous space. He led her down a long, white hallway. He opened a door to a guest room that was larger than her entire last apartment. A king-sized bed with a mountain of pillows dominated the room. An ensuite bathroom gleamed with marble and chrome. "The shower has hot water. Plenty of it," he said, as if anticipating her thoughts. "There are towels in the bathroom. And some things in the closet. My late wife, she kept things for guests. They might fit." His late wife. The words hung in the air, explaining the silence, the emptiness, the sadness in his eyes. Elara started, but no words came. What could she say? "Thank you" felt laughably inadequate. He seemed to understand. "Get some rest. Both of you. We can talk in the morning." He looked at the sleeping child in her arms. "She can sleep here. She'll be safe." He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Elara stood in the middle of the luxurious room, feeling like an intruder, a ghost haunting someone else's perfect life. She gently laid Lily on the bed. The child burrowed into the soft duvet, not even stirring. She went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. The blast of hot water was a miracle. She scrubbed away the grime of the streets, watching the dirt swirl down the drain. It felt like shedding a skin. In the closet, she found a simple set of gray sweatpants and a soft t-shirt, still in its packaging. They were plain, but they were clean. They felt like a gift from another ghost. Dressed and clean for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she slipped into the massive bed next to her daughter. She expected to lie awake, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. But for the first time in months, she felt a profound, bone-deep sense of safety. The sheets were soft. The room was warm. Her daughter was breathing evenly beside her. And Elara slept. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He did not drink it. He just held it, the cold glass a small anchor in the overwhelming quiet. He could hear the faint sound of the shower running down the hall. What had he done? He had brought two complete strangers into his home. Into his son's home. It was reckless. Irresponsible. His security team would be having a collective heart attack if they knew. But when he had seen them, when he had heard that little girl's question, he had not seen a threat. He had seen a reflection of his own broken family. A mother trying to protect her child from a world that had turned its back. A child clinging to a fragile hope. He saw Isabella in the woman's fierce, protective eyes. He saw Leo in the little girl's innocent question. The silence of the penthouse was different tonight. It was not just empty. It was expectant. For the first time in 2 years, there was another life breathing under his roof that was not paid to be there. He had built these walls to keep the world out, to protect himself and Leo from any more pain. But tonight, he had opened the door. He did not know if it was the right decision. But as he looked out at the falling snow, he knew it was the only one he could have made. The next morning, Elara awoke to the smell of coffee. Sunlight streamed into the room, bright and clear after the storm. For a moment, she was disoriented, the plush surroundings a stark contrast to the cold concrete she had expected. Then it all came rushing back. The man, Julian, this house. Lily was still fast asleep, a peaceful smile on her face. Elara slipped out of bed and crept into the hallway. She followed the scent of coffee to a vast, open-plan kitchen where Julian was standing by the counter, dressed in a simple gray sweater and jeans. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like just a man, a tired father. He turned and saw her, and a small, welcoming smile touched his lips. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Like the dead," she admitted, her voice hoarse. "Thank you. For everything. There's coffee, and I was about to make some breakfast. My son, Leo, will be up soon." As if on cue, a small boy padded into the kitchen. He looked to be about Lily's age, with his father's serious eyes and a mop of curly dark hair. He stopped short when he saw Elara, his expression immediately guarded. He walked over to Julian and hid behind his legs, peeking out at her. "Leo, this is Elara, and her daughter is asleep in the guest room. They're going to be staying with us for a little while," Julian said, his hand resting reassuringly on his son's shoulder. Leo said nothing. He just stared, his gaze unnervingly perceptive. He was a gatekeeper, a tiny guardian of this silent kingdom. Elara's heart went out to him. She knew that look, the look of a child who had known loss. She offered him a small, hesitant smile. "Hello, Leo." He did not smile back. He just watched. When Lily woke up, the dynamic shifted. Children have their own language, one that adults often forget. Lily, refreshed and fed, was bubbly and curious. She saw Leo and immediately tried to engage him, showing him the one small, slightly battered toy car she had managed to keep in her pocket. Leo remained aloof, observing from a distance. He was not unkind, just contained. He watched Lily play, but he would not join in. He built a tower of blocks by himself in a corner, his back to them. The days that followed fell into a strange, tentative rhythm. Julian insisted they stay. "It's Christmas week," he'd said. "No one should be on the streets." He arranged for new clothes to be delivered for both Elara and Lily. Simple, practical things that still felt like unimaginable luxuries. Elara tried to make herself useful. It was the only way she could combat the crushing feeling of being a charity case. She cleaned the already spotless kitchen. She folded the laundry. She learned how Julian and Leo liked their toast. Small things. Acts of service to quiet the voice in her head that screamed she did not belong here. Her focus, more and more, became Leo. She watched him. She saw how he pushed his vegetables to the side of his plate. She saw how he always picked the blue crayon first. And she saw how, whenever Julian made him a sandwich for lunch, Leo would meticulously, almost surgically, tear off the crusts and leave them behind. One afternoon, Julian was on a conference call in his study. The children were in the living room, in their separate orbits of play. Elara went to the kitchen to make lunch. She made a sandwich for Lily. Then she made one for Leo. Before she put it on the plate, she took a knife and carefully, neatly, sliced off all 4 crusts. She cut the remaining soft square into 4 perfect triangles. She walked into the living room and placed the plate on the small table beside him. "Here you go, Leo," she said softly. He looked at the plate. He saw the sandwich, perfectly crustless. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He looked from the sandwich up to her face. He held her gaze for a long moment. It was the first time he had truly looked at her. He did not say thank you, but he picked up a triangle and ate the entire thing. It was a victory, a small, quiet truce in a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. The next evening, Elara was helping Lily with a drawing. Lily was creating a vibrant, chaotic Christmas scene with a lopsided tree and a reindeer that looked more like a dog. Leo sat at the other end of the big dining table with his own paper and crayons. He was quiet, methodical as always. After a while, he got up and walked over to Elara. He was holding a piece of paper. He held it out to her, his face impassive. She took it. On the paper was a single, perfectly drawn, five-pointed star. It was colored in a brilliant, solid yellow. "It's for you," he whispered, the first words he had ever spoken directly to her. Then he turned and walked back to his seat, as if nothing had happened. Elara stared at the drawing, her throat tight. It was more than a drawing. It was a key, an offering. It was a child's trust, freely given. She looked up and saw Julian standing in the doorway, watching. He had seen the whole exchange. The look on his face was one of profound, heart-wrenching gratitude. His son had just let someone else in. Tears pricked her eyes. She folded the drawing carefully and put it in the pocket of her new jeans. A treasure. That night, the house was quiet again. The children were asleep. The city lights twinkled like a fallen constellation outside the great window. Elara could not sleep. Her mind was a whirlwind of gratitude and fear. This kindness, this safety, it felt temporary. A beautiful dream from which she was terrified to wake. She padded out to the kitchen for a glass of water. She found Julian there, standing by the window, just as he had been the first night. "I can't sleep either," he said, without turning around. "It's a lot to get used to," she replied, her voice small. "The quiet." He finally turned to face her. "It's not usually this quiet. Not anymore. Since you've been here," he paused. "Thank you for what you did with Leo. The sandwich, the drawing. He hasn't connected with anyone like that since his mother." His voice trailed off, thick with an emotion he clearly fought to control. "He's a wonderful boy," she said softly. "He just misses his mom." A heavy silence settled between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a space for unspoken things. "Why were you out there, Elara?" he asked gently. "You don't have to tell me, but I want to understand." She leaned against the counter, the cold marble a stark contrast to the warmth spreading through her chest. And for the first time in years, she told someone the truth. She told him about Mark, about his charm, how it had slowly curdled into control, about how he had chipped away at her confidence, isolated her from her family, made her believe she was worthless. She told him how Mark had managed their finances, putting everything in his name, and how, when she had finally found the courage to leave, she discovered there was nothing left. He had emptied their accounts, defaulted on the lease, and vanished, leaving her and Lily with an eviction notice and the crushing weight of his debts. "I was so stupid," she whispered, shame washing over her again. "I trusted him." "You weren't stupid," Julian said, his voice firm, cutting through her self-recrimination. "You were manipulated. There is a difference. The fault is his, not yours." He moved closer, his presence a shield. "My turn," he said, his voice dropping. He told her about Isabella, how they had met in college, how she had been the vibrant, laughing center of his world. He confessed that he had thrown himself into his work, building his empire, always promising he would slow down. Next year he was in Tokyo, closing a deal, when he got the call. A car accident. A drunk driver. She was gone in an instant. "I wasn't there," he said, his voice breaking. "My last conversation with her was a rushed voicemail from the airport. I didn't even say I love you." And Leo, he lost his mother, and all he got was half a father, a man who hides in his office because he can't stand the silence in his own home. His vulnerability was a mirror to her own. They were two broken people, shattered by different circumstances, left with the jagged pieces of their lives. Elara reached out, a hesitant, instinctive gesture, and placed her hand on his arm. "You are not half a father, Julian. You are a wonderful father. I see the way you look at him. He knows he is loved. He knows he is safe." He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. The space between them crackled with a shared understanding, a bond forged in the quiet darkness, built on the foundations of their confessed wounds. They were not just a benefactor and a victim anymore. They were two survivors. In the days leading up to Christmas, a fragile sense of normalcy, of family, began to blossom in the sterile penthouse. Julian worked from home more. The sound of children's laughter, once absent, now echoed in the long hallways. Lily taught Leo how to make believe, and Leo taught Lily the proper way to sort crayons by color. Julian took them to get a Christmas tree, a real one. They spent an entire evening decorating it, with Julian lifting the children one by one to place their favorite ornaments on the branches. At the very top, in the place of honor, Elara carefully hung the yellow paper star Leo had drawn for her. It felt right. It felt like home. The illusion was shattered by a headline on a tablet Julian had left on the coffee table. Billionaire CEO's new mystery woman, a homeless gold digger. Elara's blood ran cold. She tapped the link, her hand trembling. The article was vicious. It was full of quotes from an anonymous source close to the mother, painting her as a manipulative grifter who had abandoned a loving partner to trap a wealthy man, using her own daughter as bait. The source was not anonymous to her. It was Mark. Every word, every lie, dripped with his particular brand of poison. There was even a picture of her and Julian entering the building, grainy and invasive. She felt the floor drop out from under her. He had found her. He had found them. And he was going to destroy this beautiful, fragile sanctuary. The shame, the fear, the feeling of being tainted and worthless. It all came rushing back, a tidal wave of her past. She was bringing scandal and ruin to this kind man's door. She was endangering his reputation, his company, his son. She could not let that happen. Her decision was instant. A terrible, gut-wrenching necessity. She had to leave. While Julian was on a call and the children were napping, she moved with frantic, silent urgency. She gathered the few things that were truly theirs: Lily's worn toy car, the clothes they had arrived in. She wrote a short, tear-blotted note, leaving it on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for your kindness. I will never forget it. We can't stay and bring this trouble to you. We will be fine. I'm so sorry." She went to Lily's bed and gently woke her. "Come on, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We have to go on an adventure." Lily, groggy with sleep, did not question her. She allowed her mother to dress her in her old coat, the one that was too thin, the one that smelled of the street. Elara took one last look at the beautiful apartment, at the twinkling Christmas tree with the paper star on top. A sob escaped her lips. She choked it back. She led Lily to the elevator, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She was running again, back to the cold, back to the nothingness. It was where she belonged. The elevator doors were closing when a hand shot out and stopped them. It was Julian. His face was a mask of disbelief and hurt. He had her note crumpled in his fist. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. "I have to go," she stammered, pulling Lily behind her. "You saw the article. He won't stop. I can't let him ruin you." "Ruin me," he said, stepping into the elevator with her, forcing the doors to open again. "You think a tabloid article can ruin me? You think I care what they write?" He knelt, so he was on eye level with her. His hands came up to cup her face, his touch gentle but firm, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, Elara. Your past does not define you. That man does not get to have any more power over you. His lies mean nothing. But your board," she whispered. "Your company." "My board can read the quarterly reports," he said with a dismissive wave. "This is not about my company. This is about my home. My family." He looked past her, at Lily, and then back. "You are not trouble. You are the best thing that has happened to this home in 2 years. You brought the light back. You and Lily." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I can't. I'm so scared." "I know," he said, his voice softening. "But you are not alone anymore. You are not running anymore. We are going to fight this. Together." He stood up, his resolve a tangible force in the small space. "And we are going to win." He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. He gently led her and a very confused Lily out of the elevator and back into the warmth of the apartment. He did not let go of her hand. The next morning, Julian did something Elara never would have expected. He called a press conference, not in a stuffy boardroom, but in the lobby of his own building. Elara watched on a screen from the safety of the penthouse, her heart pounding. He stood at a podium, calm and resolute, a titan in a perfectly tailored suit. He did not deny. He did not deflect. He attacked. Yesterday, several disreputable publications ran a story about a woman named Elara, a woman I am proud to have in my life, he began, his voice ringing with authority. The story was filled with lies, fed to them by a cowardly, abusive man named Mark Redding. A gasp went through the crowd of reporters. They painted Elara as a villain. Let me tell you who she is. She is a survivor. She is a devoted mother who was willing to freeze on the street to protect her child. She is the kindest, strongest person I have ever met. He went on, his voice cold with fury as he detailed, without revealing Elara's most private traumas, the financial and emotional abuse she had suffered. He announced that his legal team had already uncovered a mountain of evidence of Mark's fraud and embezzlement, not just from Elara, but from previous partners and businesses. Warrants were being issued. Mark Redding tried to destroy a good woman, Julian said, his eyes scanning the cameras, as if speaking directly to Mark himself. He failed. He tried to use the press to intimidate and extort. He will fail at that, too. And he will face justice for his crimes. Then his expression softened. As for Elara and her daughter, they are not a scandal. They are my family. Anyone who prints another lie about them will be hearing from my lawyers. But more importantly, they will be answering to me. He finished his statement and walked away from the podium without taking a single question. Upstairs, Elara was on her knees, sobbing. But these were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic relief. He had not just defended her. He had championed her. He had given her back her name, her truth. In front of the entire world, he had stood by her side and called her family. He had made her safe. Truly, finally safe. The threat of Mark evaporated. Faced with public exposure and a mountain of legal trouble, he disappeared. The news cycle moved on. The storm passed. And in the quiet aftermath, there was only peace. It was Christmas Eve. A soft snow was falling outside, blanketing the city in a pristine white sheet. The penthouse was filled with the warm glow of the Christmas tree and the scent of cinnamon and roasting chicken. After they had put a plate of cookies and a glass of milk out for Santa, Julian tucked Leo into bed, and Elara tucked in Lily. When she came out of the guest room, she found Julian waiting in the living room. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. He was standing by the tree, looking at the paper star. He called you family, Elara said softly, coming to stand beside him. Julian turned to her, his expression serious, tender. That's what you are. What I hope you will be. Officially. He reached into his pocket. He did not pull out a ring box. Instead, he pulled out two small, simple silver lockets. I know this is fast, he said, his voice husky. And I don't want you to ever feel pressured. You have your own life to build, your own strength to reclaim. But I don't want to build my life without you and Lily in it. And neither does Leo. He opened one locket. Inside was a tiny, perfectly engraved copy of the yellow star Leo had drawn. He opened the other. It was the same. This isn't a proposal of glamour or wealth, he said, his eyes searching hers. It's a proposal of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of homework and holidays, of building a real home, together, on the foundation of our broken pieces. He did not get down on one knee. He just stood before her, his heart in his eyes. Elara, will you and Lily build a family with me and Leo? Before she could answer, two small figures appeared in the doorway. Leo and Lily, drawn by the quiet intensity of the moment. They had heard everything. It was Lily who broke the silence. She ran to Julian and threw her arms around his legs. Does this mean you can be my new daddy? Leo walked calmly to stand beside Elara, taking her hand in his small one. He looked up at her, his serious expression breaking into a rare, brilliant smile. Please say yes, he said. Elara looked from the hopeful faces of the children to the loving, patient face of the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Her heart was so full she felt it might burst. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she nodded, unable to speak. Yes, she finally whispered. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. There was no grand wedding. Not at first. There was a quiet ceremony at City Hall a few months later, with two small, beaming witnesses who threw rice and flower petals. Their real celebration was life itself. It was the everyday moments. Julian teaching Lily how to ride a bike in the park. Elara helping Leo with a school project, the two of them laughing over spilled glitter. It was family dinners filled with chatter and movie nights piled on the sofa under a giant blanket. The penthouse was no longer silent. It was a home, filled to the brim with warmth and love and the beautiful, chaotic noise of a happy family. The following December, they stood once more in front of their Christmas tree. It was even bigger than the last one. Lily, now 7 and full of confidence, directed the ornament placement with cheerful authority. Leo, more open and joyful than Elara had ever seen him, patiently helped her reach the higher branches. Elara watched them, her hand clasped in Julian's. Around her neck, she wore the silver locket. It never came off. When the tree was finally decorated, there was only one thing left. Julian lifted Leo, who carefully placed the same, slightly faded, yellow paper star at the very top. It was a little crumpled now, but it shone brighter than anything else in the room. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Elara and Julian stood by the great window, looking down at the snow-covered city. "Do you remember what she asked?" Julian said quietly, his arm around her. That first night, Elara leaned her head against his shoulder, a soft smile on her lips. She asked if Santa was coming. "He did," Julian murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "He brought me you. He brought us all a family." She looked at their reflection in the glass. Two people who had found each other in the darkness, who had healed each other's wounds, and built something new and beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. They were not broken anymore. They were whole.